Hey gang, welcome back to 3440. Today we're going to, in lecture 14 is the beginning of us mainly doing how-to lectures. So the rest of the semester will be like, this is how we do this, this is how we do that. So today we're going to do Minitab basics. The next 4 lectures will be over Minitab, and then we'll move into R after that, because R has a little bit more of a steep learning curve than Minitab does. Minitab's what we refer to as a point-click system. And I have this document, this PDF that I've got up here. About this will contain, for each lecture I'll try to make one of these so that you'll have something, a guideline or some from the examples I do in lecture. You'll have the walkthrough of how to do those things. So this are basically walkthroughs. But today we want to kind of get associated with the Minitab basics, some of the things it can do, and how do we get data in there? How do we manipulate data once it's in there if we need to manipulate it? Clean it up, that is, and then how to get descriptive statistics. The descriptive part will be pretty quick. The rest of the things might take a few minutes. But if you've got your subscription already on the hub, I recommend you follow me along. I will also include the data sets and the examples in this document, and that I'm going to go over here today in the lecture 14 or the lecture folders in D2L. So once you've downloaded it, you should get a link to where you can sign up or get started into Minitab. So I'm just going to walk through this first part here, and then we'll talk a little bit about the things that we see when they pop up. So if I go ahead and get logged in here real quick, and you'll notice that it's the licensing portal is where you want to go when you first get your license. The licensing portal is where you want to sign into this thing. So I recommend saving a link to that somewhere for quickness purposes to get there quickly. Go ahead and let me get signed in here. And the first page you'll get when you get signed in should be like this. It'll have your information and account activity, all this junk here. The thing we're concerned about is this middle one here in the top row, Minitab statistical software. So if we click on that, it brings us to this page, and it gives us 2 options here for using Minitab. We're going to use the web app primarily in lecture here because it's just easier to deal with, and some of you, if you have a Mac, you can only use the web app. If you have a PC, you have options for either one of these 2 things. You can download the desktop app and work with it through your personal computer. I will not show this. Show most of the things that you can do with the desktop app, but I will say this: the desktop app does have more bells and whistles in it. For example, if you get a table of descriptive statistics that print out from Minitab, as we'll see in example 3 later, you can copy that table, and if you try to paste that table into Word, it pastes it as a table rather than as an image. It'd be nice if it pasted as an image, but it doesn't. But with the desktop app, you can actually save or copy any output that Minitab gives you as a picture and just immediately paste it into Word. So for the Minitab project, I'm going to teach you a little different way with R to get the data, to get your projects turned in and stuff. But with Minitab, I think just a Word document, copy and pasting results and answering any questions I may ask you to answer in a Word document's fine. And for those using the web app, I recommend using, if you've got a screenshot feature where you can just capture a small window on your screen, use that to capture these images, because resizing tables in Word is a pain in the butt. As we all know, it doesn't work really well, and the sizing is an issue, and sometimes it'll make the columns not the right width and yada yada yada. So I recommend, if you use the web app, screenshot your images to import them in. But at the desktop app, you've got features that you can change there. So the desktop app, the reason I'm not using it because I have a Mac, and I can show you guys how to use it on here, but I have to do another program called Parallels, where I have to open it up, and it makes my computer really get heated because I'm running 2 things simultaneously, along with applications on different operating systems at the same time, and my computer, while it's pretty hardy, can't handle all that at one time. It gets kind of heated, and so that's the reason why I'm not showing the desktop app specifically. But if you want to use it, use it. I mean, just play around with it, and you'll figure out some of the features it has that are kind of nifty to you. All right, so but we're going to continue on with the web app. So I'm going to go ahead and open that up instead of keeping running my mouth here. So when we open it up, we'll see the navigator panel. This panel is where it'll keep a list of items as you go through your projects, or as you manipulate data or change things. It'll kind of keep a list of the important things you did over there, so that you can come back to them as long as you've saved your project, is what they call in Minitab. They call this a project that we're in now. Notice mine's untitled right now. We'll get to that in a moment. Where this Minitab logo is here is where your graphs or your descriptive statistic tables will pop up once you've asked Minitab to do that. And then down here is where your data will go. We're going to mainly play down with this stuff here today and manipulating data sets using the data and the calc menu specifically. And then when we get descriptive statistics, it'll come from the stat menu specifically. Okay. So before we get into importing data in, which is the first thing we really want to do, because we can't do anything until we've done that, let's talk about the different types of data we're going to pull in here. Just again to note here, and I've written in red in the document, I will supply any data set that we're going to use in the lecture folder. So I would download those and put them in a file on your computer, in what Minitab calls a local file, and so that you can use it on, we can easily import data into the Minitab app here. The main two types of files that we'll do are Excel and text files. So regardless of what the extension is, whether it's XLS, XLSX, or XML, you have to be cautious with Excel files. It will import them in. With the desktop version, it gives you like a kind of like a data wizard. When you pull a data in, it'll allow you to tell it certain things to ignore or whatnot. With the web app version, it doesn't do that. And so you have to make sure your data is kind of clean before it comes in a little bit, or at least you don't have any extraneous rows or columns or cells with blanks in them before the data actually begins. As a matter of fact, the first data set we're going to use is called setup time data. This is the original data set from the researcher. And notice they have in row 2 they have the name of the study that was done, equipment setup time study. We don't really need these first 3 rows here, and so if you ever have blank rows before the actual data starts, which is in row 4 where the headers are for each of the data types, you want to get rid of those. And so when we work with it, I've already done that for us, and it's just going to be called data time setup time data 2. And notice I got rid of those things so that the headers of the variables are actually listed across row 1. This is how you kind of want it to look, all right, before you pull it in. That way it'll pull it in cleanly. All right, so we'll come back to that in a minute. Text files, either CSV, which stands for comma separated value files, the .txt extension, which for Minitab, the .txt needs to be very specifically a tab delimited file. And so your separations between each entry for each column in each row needs to be tabbed, spaced. For example, I can show you that real quick. We're going to be dealing with the sales.txt in example 2, and it's tab delimited, so the spaces between here, even though this doesn't look perfectly aligned, it will pull in perfectly into Minitab, but it's got, the spaces are actually tabbed spaces. So it has to be that way with a TXT file in Minitab. It's funny how many of these things are so specific. A CSV file, like the one we'll work with in example 3, is just comma separated, so there's no spaces. The spaces between each variable name or variable value or data value is separated by commas only. Okay, so there's that as well. So I'll try to give you CSV files whenever possible because they're actually easier to make. Tab delimited ones are kind of a pain to set up. But there's three main data structures, as Minitab calls them. These are our quantitative, qualitative variables and their subcategories. all get kind of lumped into either numeric for quantitative, which is your discrete, your continuous, your ratio, and your and those kind of data. The text is your categorical variables, and the date time is your date and time type variables. So that's the three main things it does. So at the top of your columns here, you'll notice that the columns are right now, since it's blank, just all say C1, C2, C3, so forth and so on. When the data is actually in there, it will try to classify it as either numeric, text, or date time. If it's numeric, it'll stick, like for example, if C2 column was numeric, it'll just say C2. That way you know it's numeric. If it's text, it'll put a -T after the column name. And if it's a date time, it puts a D after the column name. All right. And if you import a data set ever, and one of those columns isn't correctly labeled with the right type of variable, you can change that under the data heading with change data type. We'll have to do that for one of the in one of the examples, so we'll come back to that. Okay, I know it's a lot. So let's get into example one, and let's look at how we import data, and we'll also talk a little bit about how we save it, and we're going to manipulate it a couple different ways. So example one, I want to get the setup time data2 Excel file in there. So let's get over here and do that. So under File, I'm going to go, and this doesn't matter whether you're on the web app or the desktop version. You go to File, Open, Worksheet, and for us using the web app, we need to click Local File. If you wanted to save these files to a Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive, and I recommend you have one of those, the Google Drive's definitely free. I'm going to store and save things myself in my Google Drive. But local files where I have my data sets at. So I need to pull from my local. And we're pulling the setup time data2 file in. So click open that, and boom, it filled it in down here. Alright, so that's pretty much all there is to it. And you'll notice it correctly has the variable structures, or the data structures, listed appropriately here. So if it's got names, it's got it as a text for C2 and C3. C4 and C5 are both numeric. Setup time is in minutes. That's important to remember because we're going to do something to make our run time, which is currently in hours. See if I can stretch that out a little bit. And then we've got our notes over here, which are notes that the researcher made based on what they think might have caused the job to last longer if there was some difficulty going on. This researcher in particular, the first manipulation we're going to make to this data set requires the removal of some rows from this data. If we scroll down a little bit, we're looking for something about a power issue that happened at the station there, where they set these things up. Power failure on main station. There's about 4 or 5 of these in the data set, and the researcher had decided maybe they decided they didn't want those in there for various reasons, such as power failure on main station doesn't say anything about the individual setup time and how long the thing ran, and maybe the data is not accurate there, or it took a lot longer for that particular run time to run because of the power failure, and that was not due to the person setting up their setup time in their program to run that long. So maybe we want to get rid of those things. So anyway, if we go up to data, and then we go to subset worksheet, all right, we can go in here. We're going to leave this first row. How do you want to create a subset? Use rows that match the conditions, probably pretty good. You can use row numbers if you know the row numbers, but this is going to be the easiest option to pick those things because we don't know how many rows we have, and there's like 180 rows originally or so in this data set, so we don't want to have to look through all that. So we include rows that match the option. So under this, do you want to include or exclude? We want to exclude rows that match a certain condition. All right. And so under column, we're interested in that notes column specifically because we want to find all the power failures on main station and remove those. So we're going to pick run notes, or we can type in C6 into the box. All right, we can type C6 in and it'll bring that on up. If you click out of the box, it'll put notes. The other way to do that real quick, and I'll probably just type in the column name number thing there without putting the name in from now on. You can also pick this, highlight it, and hit select, and it'll pop it in there. So equals set of values, and we want to pick power failure on main station. We probably do not want to do this in a new worksheet. Or we do actually want to do this in a new worksheet. I take that back. Because we maybe don't want to rewrite the original data set and lose that bit of information for other purposes. So maybe we just call this something like setup time, just to keep it simple. And this last option here, we'll just leave it set where it's at. Subset only the worksheet columns that are the same length. They're all the same length, but we click OK. And now it asks you, and you don't have to do this now if you don't want, but I'm going to go ahead and say I want to store this in my Google Drive, and just for purposes, because this is lecture 14, I'm just going to call it L14. And you can save it to the root directory if you want by clicking here. If you don't have a file in your Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive, save said things, and you just click OK. And it will ask you at this point, if you do have files, do you want to save it to a certain folder? I have a Minitab file, so I will save mine there. Okay, so now mine's set up, lecture 14 saved, and we won't lose any of our stuff. And the reason why this is important, and I can't stress this enough, is that if you get up and you're working on something, and you get up and go do something for an hour, 30 minutes to an hour, this thing, your session can time out on you. Which means that it will, if you click on refresh or just click on OK, it will erase the data set you've pulled in there, and it will start you from scratch. So you do want to have some way to save it. The other option to save it at any given time, if you don't want to use Google Drive or Microsoft OneDrive, is to download a copy of your current project. And what will happen when you do that is it will, I'm just going to click on it anyway, it'll download an MPX file, which is a Minitab file, project file. You can save that somewhere and have this opened up when you come back to start again. So that's another option you have. All right, I'm not going to use that option because I'm saving in my Google Drive. Okay, so we've got our new setup time, and remember in sheet 1 it was about Lisa was the first person that had a power failure on main station. She was roughly about the 39th row down. She should be gone from this data set. So if I go down to 39 here, she's still there, but that's a different version of her from the previous one, so it's missing. They're gone. The other way to check that is to scroll to the very bottom and look at how many data values you have in the set, or how many rows you actually have, and I think it's around 170. It won't show up until you got to pause for a minute and let it catch up. 176. Go down here to 176 here, and they had about 181 there. So yeah, about 5 or 6 in there. There were 5 removed values, so we did that. So that's one way you can remove rows from the data set. So that's one manipulation technique we've got. So let's highlight sleep time again, and let's move that back to the top, and we're going to manipulate this data set a little bit more because there's some other errors in here. They're not really clear right now, but the person column is an issue. The reason that is because notice the name Steve here. If you're doing the research, you would know this better than anybody else, but maybe you weren't the only one recording the data and somebody put him in as Steven in a couple of areas. Well, you don't want a Steve and a Steven in there if they're the same individual, so we got to fix that. There's also some instances where Karen is spelled with a lowercase, and Henry is also spelled with a lowercase, all lowercase. So we need to fix those things. So that's going to be the second thing we do after subset worksheet. And it's called recode option. So we're going to go data recode to text. Recode to text. And up here we want to recode the person column, so I'm going to do C2 and move out of that. And then the method we want to is recode individual values. If you pick that, you get another box. that gives you all the current values in there along with how you want them recoded. So if it's bill to bill and they're the same here in both columns, then you don't want to mess with them. But the last, if we scroll down here, then we've got Steve to Steve, but then we've got Steven to Steven, so we want Steven to become Steve, so we'll change that. Susan's okay. And here's our Henry that's lowercase and our Karen that's lowercase. So we just need to change those to where they have uppercase so they match the other Karen and Henry that are in here because they're the same people. Alright. So down here we've got where we can store the location of the recorded columns either at the end of the current worksheet in the original columns or in a specified columns of the current method. Let's see how I recommended we did this a minute here earlier. Yeah, we want to do it in the original columns because it doesn't matter that we fix the original columns. And we want to leave this show summary table here checked. So we want to do it in original columns and leave it the show summary table and click OK. And that will have fixed it and will give us a report on what it's fixed. Now if you're using the desktop version of this, you can save this little image as a picture and upload it, or you can save it as a table, upload it. Here we only have the option to copy it as a table. And the problem is when tables get to more rows or more columns in them and they get wider, sometimes Word doesn't like that. So this one will copy and paste fine into a Word doc. So if I copy that with that little down arrow there and come over here and just paste it, Command V is what I did on mine. It's probably Control V on you guys with a PC. It will post it exactly the way it looks. I can change so that the tables don't, the layout that the view grid lines is turned off so it looks much like that. But the problem is it's in a table format. Okay, I'm going to show you what happens in example 3 when we try to do that later. Okay, but small tables is not a big deal. You can copy those directly. Alright, so we did that. So everybody's fixed and all their names are aligned correctly. And the reason why we want to do that is so that we don't have separate Henrys that are the same Henry when we build a graph or get data on these people later, because then we can't really compare. We don't want to compare Henry to Henry necessarily. We want Henry to be compared to Bill or John or Karen and things of that nature. So it's important to fix these things. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is the calculator tool. I'm going to move this out of the way because I know you guys have access to this, so it's not, so I can see it on my other screen. So we want to use the calculator tool to make 2 new columns. And one of them I want to rewrite this runtime and hours column here into minutes because the setup time is in minutes, so that I can use setup time and runtime to kind of do a ratio thing for another column. So to do that, if I go to Calc, we want to convert, right now we're just converting runtime from hours to minutes. And we go to Calculator, pops up another little dialog box, and it says, the first option here says store result in variable. We don't want to store the result in the current variable, we want to build a new column. So to do that, every time you do this, it has to be in single quotes. So in between your 2 single quotes, let's call it runtime in minutes. If I can spell. Alright, minutes. The expression here is we want to take our runtime in hour variable, C5, and multiply that times 60 so we convert it from hours to minutes. Now you'll notice there's these functions here. We'll use one of them in a moment for the next column we build, but for now we're going to just use this and click OK. And we get our runtime in minutes. Now we can actually do comparison for how long it took them to set it up versus how long it ran, because now it's more convenient to do so. So to get our runtime, get a ratio of runtime to setup time might be an interesting feature that you might want to do, because then that gives you a one number that you don't have to look at these 2 columns separately. You can look at one value that will tell you, okay, well if this number is really big, it means the runtime was a lot longer as compared to its setup time than a smaller number, which would say that the runtime was not very long compared to its setup time. So if we go under Calc again, Calculator, We're not going to call this one runtime in minutes. We're going to just call it ratio for good measure. And for lack of a better name, let's not do it in double quotes like I just did. All right, ratio. And here we're going to just get rid of this in here. And I want to round this value because it's going to have more decimal places than I care for. Maybe we only want 2 decimal places. There's a rounding function in this functions list. So you can just go down this alphabetical. So we should be able to find round. And we pick that and select it. And the function will round whatever formula we put in for the number and however many decimal places we want. So there's a comma separating these two things. So for the number, I want to do the runtime in minutes, which is column C7, divided by the setup time in minutes, which is C4 in this case. And we only want 2 decimals, so we'll just keep it at 2 decimals. Click OK. So that should be enough. I'm not doing a percentage here. And you'll notice, like, so 228 runtime to 50 setup time gives us a value of 4.56. 210 to 40 setup time gives us a value of 5.25. So the smaller the setup time compared to this gives us a little bit more indication on like a ratio of how long the thing ran versus how long it took them to set it up. And that may be something we want to look into further, but I'm really just showing you the calculator function here. Okay, there may be a lot of different things we could do. All right, so enough on that one. Let's move on to example 2 and manipulate this new data set. So there's some other features. There's a lot of features in this data option here, and we're going to need a few of the different ones for this next data set. So if we go under Open Worksheet and Local File, click OK. And I want to pull in the sales.txt file this time. So we're trying to give you an example of pulling each type of file. So this is a tab delimited file. We're going to open it. Boom, and it gives us sales.txt. The first thing you should note about this data set is the row headers for each of the columns here is an actual, what should actually be a column of data on its own, right? It's Monday and all the sales values for Monday that day. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday all have the similar values to them. So the values these are in rows instead of in columns, and that's probably going to be an issue. We don't prefer not to have them like this. So what we need to do is do a transpose on this matrix, if you will, for you math majors. And so we can do that under data and the transpose columns option, and it'll bring us a dialog box. Now notice the features here in the values we have. So for this transpose the following columns, we only want the columns with actual data values in them, not the header name like Monday. So we need to put in C2 through C11. All right, that'll give us all those current columns with those things in it that we want to transpose. All right, probably do it in a new worksheet, so we'll call this sales transposed. Okay, and then we want to create a variable name using one of the columns. Well, the column with the variable names in it right now is currently called Monday. So we want to use that C1. So I'm just going to select that Monday, and then we're going to click OK, and it should give us a sales transposed tab right next to it. Now notice that most of the headers are there correctly, with the exception of this first one. I just called it labels. So we're going to rename that Monday by double clicking in the box, not Mandy, Monday. And the other thing you want to notice too is that this column is a numeric values, right? They're not text values, but it's classified as text because Monday was the label originally was text. So we need to fix that. So to fix that, we just simply need to go up to data, and there's an option called change data type that I mentioned earlier in lecture. If we click on that, it gives us an option to pick any one of our columns, and we want column 1 since that's the one that's not correct right now. And we can leave it to automatic numeric. If you click the arrow here, you'll find there's other options here, and technically while this is currency, We don't need to be that fine-tuned here. It's just a number. All right, so we're going to keep it as Monday automatic numeric. Click OK. Now our data set looks the way we want to, and we can do things with the different various days, compare them, contrast them, making graphs, make graphs involving each day of the week or all the days of the week, however we want. All right, there's a lot of things we can do that we won't do them all today. Okay. The other thing I might want to do is maybe make this all into 2 columns instead of 5 columns. You noticed in the first data set, everything here was like job type was a descriptor, the person was a descriptor, or a categories here, and then they corresponded to the actual data values. Maybe we want 2 columns, one with the days of the week in it and one with the actual sales in it, for various reasons, but mainly because maybe we want to do something that will allow us to manipulate our data set in different ways. And so we're going to do that using the stack option here. So if you do data and you go to stack options and go to columns, all right, we want to stack all the data, all the columns that are currently in our view down here, C1 through C6, into one column where all the sales values in the data set are in one column and the days of the week are listed in the other one. So if we go C1 through C6 here, right, and let's call it a new data set, we'll call it sales stacked. And then use variable names as the subscript column. So it's going to create a second column that has nothing but the variable names that are associated with each price. So it'll do a lot of work for us on the back end. So we'll leave that clicked and click OK. And now we've got 2 columns, one with the values in it, one with the subscripts in it. Let's rename this weekday. And then we'll call this one actual sales by just clicking in those boxes and giving them a name. That's important too, because later on, if you're doing graphs with these, they'll take these header names into account when they build your graph. So you want their names to be something useful there. And as you see, it's stacked Monday on top of Tuesday, on top of Wednesday, so forth and so on. And all the data values from the original table are in the right place. So a lot less work than having to, a lot of other programs will have you do. Okay, so that's nice. One other thing we can do with this, and a feature I want to show is really quickly, is the sort function. The sort function will allow us to do some things here, like maybe you're interested just as the researcher in finding out what's the minimum sales that week and what day was it on versus what's the max. So sorting these from in increasing order would probably be a good thing to do. So if we go to data and find the sort function, we can do just that. So we want to manipulate the entire 2 columns, but we want to do it with just the set based on the sales data, because those are things we can put in increasing order. So we do C2 here in this box, and then just make sure this says you got increasing or decreasing. We want to keep increasing. Sort all columns, that can stay like that. Down here, we don't want to have this at the end of the current worksheet because we don't want it placed in the same worksheet. We might want to just do a new one. So we'll just title this one Sales Sorted and click OK. And voila, we've got a sales sorted down here, and it's sorted so we can see the minimum sale that was done on a Friday, and it was $2.50. And if we go down to, I think there's 60 items in this data set, and the maximum was done on Friday. So that's really more for you, the researcher, than it is for other folks. You could also use find the minimum and maximum of these things using descriptive techniques here as well and get the same answers. Although it might just give you the values and not tell you what days of the week they are in. So sorting the columns sometimes is useful. Okay, that's all we're going to do to that data set. Now I kind of want to show you how to get descriptive statistics out of here. So we're going to do a different example because I want to bring in another data type. or another data structure type as far as the worksheet style is concerned. So I'm going to go back to my file, open worksheet local file, click OK, and I'm going to pull in this airpoll.csv for our descriptive statistics example. We're going to click OK and open, boom, and this is a nice data set. I won't go into it too quickly, but there's a column with nothing but categorical variables in it, and they're all different because these are 60 major cities across the US, and the data falling across here, all this numerical data, are rainfall, education, population density, the proportion of non-white in those cities, the NOx, which is I think nitrous oxide or something like that. It's a pollutant, and then SO2 is another pollutant level that could possibly be found in the air, and then the mortality rates per I think 100,000 people or something like that. So that's what those are, and so there's a lot of information here that's useful, but we just really want the descriptive statistics right now for all these columns that are numeric. It won't make sense for us to do descriptive stats on the city column because simply there's nothing there to do descriptive statistics on. So to get us a list or a table of all the descriptive stats we possibly could want, we go to the stat function up here, or the stat listing up here, and go to basic stats and over to display descriptive statistics. And I want descriptive statistics for everything but city. So I want to do C2 through C8. All right. If you wanted only a certain ones of these, real quick, you can just list them one by one with a space between them, and it'll do the same thing. So like say we wanted C2 through C5, and then we also wanted C8, and we skip over the C6, C7. We could do that as well. All right, so that's kind of how you would get this set up in here, but we're going to leave it C2 through C8 for now. You've got two tags down here. We're going to leave the graphs one alone for now because it gives you a bunch of different graphs there, but statistics is what we want. And it opens up this box here that gives you all the possible types of descriptive statistics you could possibly want. There are some in here we have not discussed. But there are several in here we have, like variance and coefficient of variation are some things we might want. We got our quartiles here, our min and max, in non-missing and in missing. So if you have missing data values, it'll tell you how many missing values you have in the data set. This one has none, so I'm going to uncheck that box. And so there are a couple other things in here you're not going to be as familiar with. The trimmed mean, for example, is, if I'm remembering correctly, that's just the mean minus the outliers. So it will do that work on the back end for you. The sum of squares is a term we use in, it gives you the sum of the data values squared, so it's like the sum of x squared, if you will, for each one of those row or columns. Alright, so we don't really need that here. Skewness and kurtosis are two things I mentioned briefly in ProbStat. So if you've taken ProbStat from me, I've probably mentioned it. But there are other measures of how the shape of your distribution are, and can kind of help you lead to whether your data is truly normal or not. That's more for an advanced class, so we're not going to go into those here. And I'm going to click OK. I'm happy with the things I've chosen, and click OK here, and we should get a table of, for each variable, we get the sample size, the mean for each group, the standard error of the mean, which is just the standard deviation divided by the square root of the sample size is what that is. And that value is actually used. Some of you have taken elementary stats or have done confidence intervals before. That's the value we need to help create a confidence interval. Okay, that's what that's used for. The variance, coefficient of variation, we get all the stuff we wanted. Now quickly, you can copy this and paste it directly into your Word document, but let me show you what happens when you do that. It doesn't look pretty, so I just Command or Control V mine to paste it, and you notice it kind of gets all. Now you could try to clean this up, You're using some of the word table things by highlighting it, going up here into the layout and fixing those things and sorting the items and resizing the column widths and all that crap. It takes a little bit long to do that, unfortunately. So I don't recommend doing it this format with these tables. When you do graphs later, you can copy and paste them in just fine. There's no issue with those. But with these data tables, they want to import them into Word as a table, and it can be problematic, like you see here. And it looks messy. We don't like it when it looks messy because that's hard to read. So instead of doing that, I recommend screenshotting this as an image, which I've already done, and just importing that in, or inserting it from a picture. You probably drag and drop it in here if you want to. Let me see if that works real quick. Just out of curiosity. It should work. So I took a screenshot. Yeah, it does. You can drag and just drop it if you have it saved to your desktop or a file somewhere. You can just drag and drop it in there, and it looks much better that way. So that's how you kind of want to get your stuff into your Word document. That being said, I don't want you to upload Word documents for me because Word documents can get out of sync when you open them up in D2L. So once you're done finalizing your Minitab project later, you want to save it as a PDF file as well, and then upload the PDF file for me in those things. Okay, so that's pretty much it for today, guys. I'm sure I missed something, and I'm sure some of you will have questions. I just say the best way to get into this thing is to get in there and play with it a little bit. Go through with me. If you didn't follow me through this originally, I say go through it and try to do these manipulations. They're in that how-to document in the Lecture 14 folder, because this is kind of how it's going to work from here on out. So if you got questions or can't get something to work, we need to figure and iron those things out for you. Again, for those of you who want to use the desktop version, go gangbusters there. You have a little bit of easier time with that as far as copying tables, because you can save them as pictures. But anyway, enough about that today. I hope everybody's having a great one, and I'll see you on the next how-to lecture.